Ok, så nå er den oppe. Ok, perfekt. Da prøver vi også den. Men den ser jo ikke skjermen nå. Den ser jo ikke det jeg ser.
One of the long-term trends that may happen, we have one data point or two at this point, but one trend is somewhat more assertive the United States, more than we thought originally with President Trump, with his getting involved in Iran, even the visit to NATO, and his apparent shift in his position. If in fact the United States is relatively more assertive
nå, så ikke, når ikke du er her, hva trykker jeg på da?
have potential ramifications for economics as well as for markets.
Ok, så kan jeg trykke på den, så camera view.
Game capture.
Ja. Ok. Ok, nå henger den. Nå konge. Thank you, my friend. Da går vi på rønner, da. Er du der, Robert? Robert? Hører ikke han.
Potentially significant positive.
Prater du nå, Robert?
Coming up, everybody likes to complain about Congressional Budget Office estimates of the costs and benefits of big legislation. We take a look at its track record.
Han prater nå, men jeg hører ingenting.
Det programmet jeg hadde før, ned nå.
Prater du nå, Robert? Ja, nå hører hun. Ja, perfekt. Fått nytt oppsett, så nå driver jeg bare og tester ut litt her. Ja. Ja, ok. Nå går alle der her.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta. And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bloomberg launches our inaugural 25 African startups to watch list.
About 2.5 years ago, we created a solution. We are able to generate refrigeration using the sun and water. We're able to store energy in the form of ice, as opposed to storing energy in the form of lithium batteries.
Good dog.
We're integrated in every refrigerator, a pay-as-you-go technology,
Good.
allowing individuals and small businesses
Tusen hjertelig, Morten.
to pay as low as $10
Da er vi oppe og går
per
ordentlig.
refrigerator.
Uncover is a women's wellness brand that is specifically made for women of color. It's based in Africa, which is the most underserved beauty market in the world. We are making Africa a priority and not an afterthought. We believe that the population on this continent deserves
Den discoen blir egentlig over her nede, for jeg kan ikke sitte
heard,
i
and
huet
we're
opp.
giving this consumer a voice.
Det kan egentlig være egentlig...
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade. Watch Bloomberg Tech.
This is the Asia trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
Egentlig.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Africa, a region rife with potential for growth and opportunities, but not without its challenges. Bloomberg highlights the biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of African business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next? I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this is Next Africa. New episodes every month, only on Bloomberg.
Forsvant den her nå. Affedrot. Sånn.
This is a story about trust.
Sånn.
Trust that Congress has
Den
some
må bli
sense
vann.
of the consequences of major economic
Sånn.
legislation
Nå er alt like
before
stort.
it votes on it. In the United
Yes.
States, the statute
Sånn, nå er vi i mål her. Nå kan vi gjøre et eller annet.
Bloomberg economics editor Michael McKee brings us the tale of the CBO and its track record in making those predictions.
Sometimes our numbers are welcome, and sometimes they're inconvenient.
Philip Swagel has helmed the Congressional Budget Office since 2019, after stints at the U.S. Treasury Department under President George W. Bush during the financial crisis, and teaching international economic policy at the University of Maryland. The fact is, a lot of his job and methods are not up to him. They're dictated by legislation, including the Congressional Budget Act of 1974.
The cost estimates we do of legislation are based on the legislative text, and they're measured against current law. So, for example, the reconciliation legislation that we're evaluating now, we evaluate that against current law, in which there's certain provisions of the 2017 Tax Act that expire. And that's the statute. And we understand that some policymakers prefer to look at it on a current policy basis. Their view is that they meant for the 2017 Tax Act to continue, and they'd like to evaluate the cost against that baseline. And that's a legitimate way to look at it, and we can provide that information if they want. It's just not the standard way.
Alt må røre på seg her nå. Den forsvant derfra til ditt. Den skal jo ikke gjøre det. Nå forsvant hele oppsettet mitt her. Bra da nå.
The reason why that is relevant is what CBO is sort of statutorily required to do, what it was created to do, is to provide these cost estimates to policymakers about the likely impact of different policy proposals on what the budgetary outlook is going to look like for the country. And so the precise mechanics of how they do that, do they give you a one-year cost estimate or what is now convention, a sort of 10-year budget window horizon, that's changed over time. But the idea of setting up this organization,
alt forandrer seg her, jo ikke å ha det sånn her.
The important work of being able to keep score about what deficits are going to look like because of choices that federal policymakers are making is something that is very much in keeping with what their mission is.
Alle grafene mine forsvinner jo fra det jeg skal se på.
Tax policies, it has to do the math on future estimates, and not just once. There are two other important concepts here, static and dynamic.
No, that's right. So the static estimate, or we sometimes call it the conventional estimate, economy is not affected.
Den var der, ble borte, den forsvant bort dit, og den forsvant.
Tax component of the reconciliation legislation being considered now, and it's big enough that one would expect the tax cut to affect the economy. We think it would lead to a larger economy with more people working.
Men det skal ikke forsvinne fra trynet mitt. Hvis jeg har oppe VG, så skal ikke plutselig Dagbladet komme opp.
But now we're working on a dynamic estimate in which we look at the legislation, we look at the effect on the economy, and then we look at the feedback from the economy back to the budget. And so that provides more information. It just takes longer for us to do.
It's where CBO scoring meets legislation that things get especially tricky. First, because predicting America's economic future
vi prøver å få til det beste her.
In theory, I'm just going to raise the tax rate by 1 percentage point, and I'm going to have the impact, at least in 1 year.
Da har jeg ting oppe. Da kan vi begynne å... Det var litt uvant dette her nå. Nå forsvant grafen der nå. Hvor ble det nå?
Is actually more complicated. People are going to make different choices about the extent to which they decide to participate in the labor force and accumulate labor income as a result of that tax shift. They might also make different choices, particularly in industries like in finance, where you can be in an industry where you might receive carried interest, instead of receiving labor market income that has a different tax treatment. And so these scorekeepers have like a really difficult task.
Altså jeg kan egentlig ikke ha 3 opp samtidig, jeg må bare ha 2. Er det
analysis, and that is a super difficult task to do when they're trying to work as quickly as they are, just given the speed at which things like the reconciliation process invariably are moving.
Forecasting economic outcomes is hard enough in the most stable times, but then, of course, there's responding to politics.
Any bill that's marked up by a committee, we produce a cost estimate. That's by statute. Then there's reports that are requested of us. For example, earlier this month in June, we provided policymakers with information on the revenues raised by the tariffs that President Trump has put in place since his inauguration of his second term. That was requested by a group of senators.
Well, sometimes it seems the requests you get come with a political bias. What do you do then?
Okay. Jeg må ha den her nede. Det blir helt apekatt for meg.
We are here to support members.
Der var den.
No opinion on what the right legislation is. We're just trying to give them the analysis. We're focused on the legislation.
Hva skal den være?
Anything within the four corners of the legislative text that we evaluate.
Nå, vet du, jeg har temperamentsproblem, ikke sant? Nå klikker det for meg, liksom.
Change tariffs, and that
Det var
raises a
den
considerable
der.
amount of revenue. He's
Hva ble
changing
den borte?
immigration in the United States, and he's changing regulations.
Ja, det problemet her, skjønner du, for alle skjermene forsvinner fra et vindu til et annet der, mens jeg prøver å se her. Ja, nå forsvant du...
Of the reconciliation legislation. I just saw the New York Times, the Washington Post, all have articles making use of that distributional analysis, which of course the members of Congress who asked us the question understood that it would get that kind of...
Altså, når det mellomrom der, hvorfor i helvete er det der? Kan ikke bare ha 3 sånne fucking skjermer oppe, og så holder denne PC kjeft. Der, trykker på de 3 der. Det er den der, ikke sant? Sånn. Hvorfor kommer de opp? De er jo her nede. Jo, men jeg driter i det. Jeg vil bare ha skjermene som ferdig, liksom. Sånn. Jeg må jo se hva jeg driver med her.
Democrats have frustrations.
Kan ikke det må være der da? Så er den her helt alene.
The thing that people sometimes miss, though, is that a lot of the choices that CBO is making that are being critiqued aren't actually choices that they have any control over. So in the context of this legislation, something like having the baseline that they're measuring against,
hvis det bare kan være sånn, så er ting bra. Sånn må det være, ikke sant?
that the Trump tax cuts are slated to expire
Ok, da prøver vi på nytt.
and so their extension is judged against that expiration. That's not a choice CBO is making.
Nå forsvant den der oppe nå.
They are sort of mandated.
Det her går jo ikke.
As Yogi Berra said,
Dette funker jo ikke, jeg ser ikke hva jeg driver med.
especially about the future.
Hvorfor forsvant grafen her? Hvor ble den hen?
CBO for underestimating growth in
Hvor
2022
er den nå?
when it analyzed the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
When I look at our performance, I try to understand the context of the performance, and that one soundbite, it's sometimes the one...
Nå forsvant grafen her.
That's deeply misleading, because it's almost as if someone who says that is implying that somehow the 2017 Tax Act
Nå skal den være sånn.
caused the high inflation, or what caused the immigration surge. And obviously, you know...
Nå skal den være sånn. Nå kan ikke den forsvinne flere ganger
I
her.
don't think it's fair to think that CBO
Sånn, sånn, sånn.
could have predicted the pandemic, the inflation, the immigration, QE, and all that.
Do you get mad when members of Congress use the CBO as the whipping boy?
No, I don't. I certainly don't get mad. I understand it. I understand the political process. CBO
dette er jo helt forferdelig oppsett.
But we certainly understand it.
Det er ikke din skyld, men det her funker jo ikke i det hele tatt. Grafene blir borte. Nå er vi her.
I mean, you know,
Yes. Tror ikke det. Jeg vet ikke hvordan det er svare på.
The president on Truth Social, but that is part of the political process.
Has this been sort of
Nå er det marketmakere som kjører topp og ned, da, så kan det gå alle veier akkurat nå.
who are working on tariffs, doing all their math and coming up with a number, and then the president changes his mind.
The tariffs has been an area of policy that is just changing, and we do our best to keep up with it. Members of Congress want to know, and so we routinely provide members of Congress with information on the budget impacts of the tariffs. And the numbers that we've given most recently, earlier in June, we waited until the tariffs have stabilized. There are very high tariffs on China, and those came down, and that's the moment at which we did the analysis. Now, since then, there were actually subsequent changes, but they were much smaller. It makes it hard, but we do our best.
Are you ever wrong?
I start by saying we're human, and you just have to have a humility that we will do our best, but inevitably we will get things wrong. Back in 2009 and 2010, when President Obama was putting forward the Affordable Care Act, eventually called Obamacare, we are done. CBO expected that the mandate provision in that legislation would be very impactful, that the mandate on individuals and on businesses would lead to a large increase in people gaining health insurance. And it turned out that just wasn't the case. CBO looked at the experience of Massachusetts, and the Commonwealth had a mandate, and in Massachusetts, it was very impactful. But it turned out it just wasn't the case for the rest of the country. We have since gone back and evaluated what happened and published a report on the mandate, and now we've taken on board a different analysis in our healthcare projections. When we get things wrong, we need to analyze it, understand it, and adjust. I've been director for just over 6 years, since June of 2019, but I own every mistake CBO has ever made.
Errors aside, the CBO's estimates have value that stretches far beyond the Beltway. Wall Street pays close attention to what Swagle's team says about growth and deficit expectations in an effort to better understand what it all means for markets and especially bonds.
We look at their forecast. So
Roy, har du 5,000 på konto, eller hvor mye er det du har på kontoen?
The cost of any legislation. But they give you the assumptions, they're extremely transparent. We will look at their growth assumptions, their inflation assumptions, their interest rate assumptions. So we absolutely look at the CBO number as I would say, a baseline for what the deficit will look like, what legislation is going to do to the deficit. And then we think about things that the CBO may not be incorporating by law that we would want to incorporate.
3,000, har du da 3 ganger så mange, har du da 3 ganger så store posisjoner, eller?
Bill moving through Congress, CBO projections are under scrutiny.
I think the scoring, you and I have talked about it quite a bit. It's Washington style.
Jeg tror jeg hadde satt med en hedge, selv om det går oppover, eller nedover, bare for å holde den. Og på natta nå så kan det gå alle veier.
Big beautiful bill. What do you think of it?
I think it looks pretty fair, and it's in line with a lot of the other estimates. Our estimate was closer to 3 trillion. You're getting 2.8 from the dynamic CBO score. We do give more weight to the dynamic score from the CBO, where they try and incorporate what would the legislation do to growth and inflation and interest rates. And they try.
Jeg hadde heller tatt og hedget litt her nå frem til altså hver natt nå så går gull alle veier. Det går jo opp og ned med $30-40. Og nå sitter folk ballefeil, ikke sant? Og så kom det Iran-melding I stad, og så kom det negativt fra Nvidia. Det kan jo gå alle veier her, ikke sant? Men det mange nå som sitter feil.
But the other one is in terms of the assumption that the CBO has is of growth remaining between 1.5% and 2% over the next 10 years. And I think we have to acknowledge that business cycles happen, that you are likely to have a recession in that 10-year period. So my own estimate is that the number is likely to be a little higher. Also, CBO assumes that current law will hold. So the temporary it assumes by law that they will expire.
Det har faen meg ramlet fra $350 nesten.
Actually rein in the deficits.
That much seems to be true no matter who's in charge and no matter what the CBO has to say about it. Getting unbiased information and acting responsibly on it don't always go hand in hand.
Next, putting a price tag on citizenship, or at least residency. We take a look at President Trump's proposal to get the deficit down by selling gold cards and how similar programs have worked around the world.
La han gå? Nei, er det gærent. Jul kom ned på grunn av han sa det var fred på søndag, og så sa han at Powell skulle få sparken. Og det kommer ikke til å skje. Powell får ikke sparken. Kommer til å hente seg inn i dette her. Det bare spørs hvor langt ned det skal falle først. Det er kun det det går på.
There is a nice confluence between the long-term investor and what we're trying to do. We have an operating principle that's in our handbook, take the long view. When we went public, we put a timeline up on the screen for the whole company in an all-hands meeting. And that timeline went from founding to 100 years out. And the IPO was one dot in 1 year on that timeline. And we tried to orient the employees to, this is a wonderful event, this IPO, but it's a moment in time on a very long journey.
This is a company that you want to exist in 100 years.
We do.
Wall Street doesn't think in.
No, they think in like hours. Yeah. And what I've learned Wall Street, and particularly Wall Street investors, when they say they are long-term investors, that means they'll keep your stock for like a month. There has been one instance where I did something that was just for short-term stock, and I felt so bad about it that I don't think I'll do it again.
What was that?
There was one quarter, a few quarters ago, we were not going to beat the quarter. We were gonna probably just hit it, and so far we beat every quarter. So we were all like, wait, what? Our perfect record. We're like a 4.0 student that is gonna get a B for the first time. This is not good. And I decided that for a short period of time, at the end of a lesson in our app, we would show 2 ads instead of 1. Turns out that by itself was good enough to beat the quarter, but it's bad for the product. It's not good. After that, I'm never doing that again.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Onen, only on Bloomberg.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Sherrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news, and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering. We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
This is a story about the price of citizenship, or at least the price tag we want to put on it. For years, countries around the world have offered citizenship or residency to those willing to put up the cash. President Trump has a new proposal for the United States, and as so often with the president, it involves his favorite color.
$5 billion. For $5 billion, this could be yours. That was the first of the cards. You know what that card is?
Gold card.
It's the gold card. The Trump card, gold card.
Who's the first buyer?
Me.
President Trump's proposal to create a U.S. gold card isn't really new. Since 1882, the United States has charged immigrants an admission fee for coming to the country, starting at 50 cents a person, raising it to $4 in 1907.
Du bare kjører hvis du har short, så kjører du en long, og hvis du har long, så kjører du en short. Du bare gjør det motsatte, så du sitter I null, basically. Til retningen går den veien du tror du skal gå. Hvis du usikker. Og for å få mer marginer. Så nå har vi long med 0,05 kontrakter bare. Hvis du da brudd, så kan du sette så du bare har long 3, så da tåler du mye mer, og så kan du være med opp uten at du trenger å sprenge kontoen.
Professor at the London School of Economics, where she has studied what is known as investment immigration. The revived push in the U.S. parallels other countries experimenting with golden visas and passports.
They're actually much more common than most people think. So if we're thinking about the golden passport program, so citizenship, there's over 20 countries with legal provisions that enable this, and there's about a dozen that regularly approve people through their programs. For thinking about the residents, the Golden Visa programs, they're all over the place. You can find them in just about 60 countries, 5 territories, even in places like the US and half of the EU member states.
The programs vary according to how much money is required, whether it's an investment in the country and what kind of investment, or just a fee paid to the government. And, by the way, whether the immigrant only gets to reside in the country or a citizen.
Hører dere nyhetene bedre nå på den nye PC-en her? På nye oppsettet, eller hører dere ingenting?
So these are programs where you donate to a government or invest in a country, and in pretty short order, and sometimes without even ever going to the country, you become a citizen. It's a little bit different to a Golden Visa program, where you get not citizenship in the country, but residence in the country.
Whatever form these programs take, the goal is always the same: growing the economy of the host country. And the smaller the country, the more of a difference they can make. Investment immigration programs account for up to half of the GDP of the island nations of Dominica, St. Kitts, and St. Lucia.
So usually the idea is to bring investments into the country. Now, if we're talking about very, very small states, and usually they're the ones who are doing the citizenship programs, the amount of money that a government can bring in through these programs can be absolutely enormous. So some countries see well over 30% of GDP coming in through these programs. Now, if you're thinking about the golden visa programs where you're just getting residence, we're often talking about much bigger economies. In terms of what countries get out of it, we'll be more targeted if we're looking at those investments.
But that's where the math doesn't always add up. One immigrant's investing can be one local citizen's crowding out, as in real estate. Take Spain, for example.
We've seen Spain shut its program down, Ireland shut its program down, the UK shut its program down. And if you're only approving a couple hundred, people per year, a couple hundred applications per year, is it really worth it to keep on the books, given the potential risks involved?
Spain's scramble for investment began after the European debt crisis of 2009. Since the start of its program in 2013, Spain granted more than 15,000 visas tied to real estate investment. From 2016 to 2023, the program generated $10 billion in investments, but that also helped drive up property values.
A invertir en innovación, a dinamizar nuestro tejido productivo y no para quienes simplemente buscan especular con un bien como es la vivienda.
Spain shut down its program as of April, but even as countries like Spain have cut back, others, like New Zealand, are ramping up.
We've had about 200 people apply, which is about 150 more than applied in the previous 2 years, so it's becoming more and more popular.
Stuart Nash is a former Minister of Economic Development in New Zealand and is now a principal in Nash Kelly, which works to attract high net worth individuals to the country. What are the requirements?
Yeah, so there are two categories. We've got the growth category, and you've got to invest 5 million Kiwi, which is about 3 million US. And then we've got one called the balance category, which you've got to invest 10 million Kiwi, which again is about 6 million US. You've got to do that over 6 months. For the growth category, it's got to be in managed funds or companies. The balance category, it's a little wider. You can do bonds, you can do equities, you can also do managed funds and businesses as well. So, we really get at Nash Kelly that if you're sitting in America, you're looking at New Zealand, it looks like this oasis that you want to go to. You've read about it. Kiwis are really friendly. You know about the golf courses, you know about the environment, but you don't know much about the investment ecosystem. So it's a little bit of a risk.
When you put together your program in New Zealand, did you go to school, as it were, on some of the other programs and say, we don't want to do that, we're going to structure it this way instead?
Yeah, very much so. So, in Portugal, I think you only have to invest $200,000. It's not a lot of money. In New Zealand, we decided that, we want the people who can drive success, who have been successful. The European Court of Justice has just ruled the Malta Golden Visa illegal because it's bringing in, they think, or has a potential to bring in a whole lot of dirty money. We didn't want that in New Zealand, hence the reason why the high level of integrity to prove that the money you're investing in New Zealand has come from legitimate means. We didn't want this to be a backdoor for criminal money coming in.
The cost of granting residency to the wrong people, as Nash puts it, is just one of the things countries have to take into account to determine whether investment immigration is worth it.
There can be a lot of concerns about foreigners coming in. Xenophobic sentiments, you can find them across the world in various measures as well. So governments have to balance what they think are appropriate trade-offs in terms of how many foreigners do we want to allow.
Försvinner graferna mine på PC-en? Vad är grejen med det?
Sometimes you can have people who have a lot of money, but maybe they gained it through nefarious means, or maybe there could be shady things in the background. So making sure that these are the people you want to let in is also a very important decision to make.
Screening out undesirable candidates for immigration may help make sure the right people are admitted and that their money is going into the right projects. But it also can get in the way, as it does for the current U.S. program, according to Alex Nurasta, Vice President for Economic Policy at Cato Institute.
So the EB-5 is a portion of the employment-based green card in the United States. There are 10,000 of these visas set aside for EB-5 every year. What we've seen in recent years is basically about 5,000 of those are taken up by actual investors.
Story.
$1,000 or around $800,000 to make an investment.
Men det noen som hører meg? For jeg får ikke noe tilbakemeldinger, så jeg aner ikke om jeg er live eller hva faen det er. Du hører nå? Det bedre lyd eller dårligere lyd?
So it's really suffered under this incredible burden of red
Bedre, men lavere. Ok, da må vi ta den opp, da.
Decade after decade in the United States.
President Trump's gold card idea would cut through much of this by simply putting a price tag on admission into the country.
We don't know all the details of President Trump's gold card proposal. It hasn't been passed in
det bedre nå,
and he doesn't have the legal authority to issue green cards based on this. But as far as we know the details, it would be selling lawful permanent residency, also known as a green card, in exchange for a $5 million fee paid to the U.S. government. This is a fee paid. This is not an investment. This is not an investment that these foreigners would
Jeg bør kanskje ha en ny mikrofon, da.
It is a straight up fee paid to the United States government of $5 million.
If in truth Congress were to adopt this approach and pass legislation, so it was legal, could it make a material difference to the debt or the deficit of the United States?
It's very unlikely that selling gold cards like this would make a material large difference to the U.S. deficit or U.S. spending. For one, the price is way too high.
But Narasta does think that the president may be onto something, creating a market for U.S. admission and letting Adam Smith do the rest, something suggested some time ago by Nobel Prize-winning economist Gary Becker.
Our fiscal problems go far beyond what can be resolved by selling a gold
Nasdaq bare går og går og går, på tross av massiv innsidesalg på Nvidia. Spennende. Sier Nvidia-ledelsen dumper jo aksjer, ikke bare han sjefen selv, men ansatte.
And there would be a huge increase in visa fees paid to the U.S. government. So I think, ironically, the only way that we could actually make a difference in the deficit through such a scheme would be by lowering the price dramatically.
If you had total control and could design any system that you wanted, what would it look like?
I'd probably go back to the 19th century and make it just incredibly easy for people to come to the United States lawfully, so long as they aren't a criminal or a national security threat or are sick. But if I have to charge a price, if I have to have a restriction on the number of immigrants coming to the U.S., I would charge a price. I would sell visas. This is sort of economic.
Ok, jeg skrudde på feil, skru på den. Hva faen? Det bedre nå, eller?
Efficiently allocated only through the pricing mechanism, only by charging a price, and only by allocating those visas to those who are willing to pay the price. So charging a price for a visa is a very good way to allocate them to people who really want it.
How do we make sure we get the right people?
So what a pricing system does is it internalizes decisions to the people who actually make them. And as a result, we're going to
Det var jævla mye smartere nå da, for nå har det ikke green screen, og vi fortsatt har de skjermene. Jeg synes det var mye bedre.
Who can do much better here in the United States than those who could be selected by Congress.
Narasta says that a market-based system could even help address the country's...
Men man kan gjøre sånn at det bakgrunn på meg, eller det går kanskje ikke nå?
A market-based system would...
Nu kan det stå om velg i stedet grønn så hvit, men da kan ikke ha noe hvit på det.
Ok. Det på Stig, han plutselig går opp i røyk og sånn, og han har ikke green screen. Og så blir granbrukere, Stig.
Smuggling fees to come to the United States, and they don't even have a guaranteed way to stay, so it's a highly risky investment. If instead those individuals
Streamlabs, det det vi bruker, ikke? Vi bruker Streamlabs, gjør ikke?
Or could otherwise save up wages in their own country, then they can buy one of these green cards, come to the United States, they don't have to come illegally, you actually have a goalpost where if they make a certain amount of money in their home country, they could afford to buy one come here, it would really undermine
grafen min bare forsvinner plutselig.
and it would allow a way for even
Veldig rart, bare det blir borte.
Because ultimately it's just a price. It's just amount of money. You and I, we're not super wealthy individuals in the US, so we can borrow money from
for mange faner.
I think that banking systems throughout the world, the financial institutions, are falling over themselves, head over heels to give individuals to buy green cards that come to the United States. The returns on them are so high. These people would be willing and able
det lettere altså, ikke? Det mye mer oversikt I hvert fall.
This is something that would be a boon to the US financial system, to the workers involved, and to the US economy at large.
Jeg likte at den der. Jeg synes det var jævla bra. Da kan man ha turene her, ikke sant? Jeg synes det var veldig, veldig bra oppsett. Egentlig ble det bare av Discord der. Nei, for faen! Jeg kan ha Twitch der! Jeg ser jo folk prater og sånn. Nå ser jeg jo ingenting. Nå prater de om det her. Lyden av strålene. Eller
Coming up,
det
the
på
battle
Twitch?
for the economic soul of New York City. We take a look at the dramatic policy prescriptions of Zoran Mamdani, the apparent winner of Tuesday's Democratic primary. That's next on Wall Street Week.
Vi kan se en rød nesa med. Helvete. Det med nesa med, liksom. Ja, men det kult da, for da kan jeg se om det YouTube, Twitch, og jeg kan se alt der på samme sted der. Hva det liksom... Nå snakker vi business her. Hva faen, gull gikk opp $17 på kvarter her da. La oss håpe at den går opp $100 på 10 minutter. Du kan få lov til å legge det noen ganger. Han har holdt på her hele dagen. Det dritbra her da. Det var jævla bra. Tusen hjertelig. Nei, for jeg tenkte... Nå ser dere meg sidene fra, for kameraet jo der. Men det lettere for meg å ha alt oppe så tett, så jeg ser alt. Litt lettere for meg. Og nå har jeg ikke noe kråk her, ingenting. Nå er liksom alt helt perfekt her. Fy faen her. God stol og hele pakka. Nå må jeg drikke alkohol. Jeg skal begynne å drikke whisky.
It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. Bloomberg.
Nei, bare for gull opp mot 3,500 skal jeg røyke sigar. Skal jeg drikke cognac. Skal jeg trade drita.
Massive savings right now.
It's already a different game.
Bloomberg the China Show. Weekdays around the world.
Jeg trader sikkert bedre da. Faktisk. Det bedre enn jeg drita.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry.
Du må nesten være drita for å forstå hva han Trump driver med.
Like no one else. ETF IQ only on Bloomberg.
When you're talking about retirement, it doesn't matter if you are in rural America, urban, suburban. It's not a blue state, it's not a red state issue. It absolutely is an American issue that we can all relate to. And so I am optimistic. And the reason why I'm optimistic is that the policy that we have been able to achieve over many years as an industry have been bipartisan. It did not matter who
Jeg kunne ønske at dere kunne se hvordan det nå, for det her skikkelig porno, ass.
And talking about how do we continue to make sure that more Americans can have access to a secure retirement, and how do we make sure that by doing that, that can put less burden on Social Security. By doing that, that puts more money to work so that the caregivers, children are not having to carry that burden.
Ikke noe hundelyder her, og ikke kråke her. Alt bare trening.
We cannot close this retirement gap without private-public partnership.
Ja, men uansett da, det som skjer nå av markedet i hvert fall er akkurat samme som skjedde på fredag. Trump driver nå for å få gjennom denne skattepakka si. Og få litt motstand. Og så kom det masse innsidesalg på en videodag som egentlig er ganske negativt. Nasdaq popper opp hver eneste dag. Der er det masse shortcovering. Det er ikke noe nytt som har kommet på Nasdaq. Gull falt jo på åpning og går rett opp igjen nå. Det er basically marketmakere som setter alle stopplås. Kommer til å gå pika over hver antagelig. Det kommer sikkert gå rett opp, og så går den rett ned og rett opp. Det gjør de hver natt. Tar ut alle nivåene. Og så får du den normale nivåen på åpning i morgen. Det er det som skjer hver eneste natt. Hvis vi ser på rentene nå, skal vi sjekke om det har skjedd noe på de da.
Mamdani is a very charismatic 33-year-old young man.
Bitte litt ned. Så vidt det er liksom. Og så har du sølv. Er ned 2,13%. Det er ganske mye faktisk. Den har gått veldig mye i forkant. Ellers har det ikke skjedd så veldig mye egentlig. Det er ikke noe nytt som har kommet. Eneste er at Elon Musk forteller at den pakka til Donald Trump er helt sinnssyk. Den vil ødelegge for alle arbeiderne, og han har gått ut hardt igjen på Twitter i dag da. Det er det eneste nye, også at Trump har sagt at Iran vant ikke den krigen. Ellers er det ikke noe nytt som har kommet. Ikke noe.
What are the likelihood that he actually will be able to implement those as opposed to just talk about them?
Og vi ser da, hva som skjer videre med gull her.
Which honestly has been the position of generally.
I får ikke noe nytt som har kommet. Ingenting.
Right now we're facing a situation really in New York where our economy is.
Det som litt spesielt nå, at det amerikanske markedet, det bare helt merkelig nå. Du har PE på Nasdaq på nesten 40 liksom, skal ligge på mellom 16 og 20. På S&P så jo PE-en over 20. Så du har veldig mange nå som ikke handler bort til USA. Så gull burde egentlig gå opp på de tallene som kom på fredag. Inflasjonstallene var har begynt å gå opp nå. Jeg tipper at gull kommer til å hente seg ut uka på det. Så grunn til du skal kjøpe gull, så kjøper gull når inflasjonen stiger, og så skal du kjøpe gull når uroligheter. Da kjøper du gull. De tallene som kom på fredag var da stikk i strid med hva Trump har sagt. Han sier at det ikke noe inflasjon, sier Trump. Det feil. Den har begynt å stige. Det var derfor vi fikk den rekylen på gull på fredag også. Men marketmakerne, de tjener penger. De tjener penger på at du taper penger.
So we are in a competitive situation. We are at risk of losing business and jobs. We have our economy, fortunately, has been very innovative and has grown while we have outsourced jobs to other places. Jobs, administrative jobs in the financial industry, back office jobs, have been leaving New York for 40 years. But we've replaced them with high-paying technical and other jobs. The question now is, where's the breaking point? And certainly the high tax rate is a big contributor. And I have to mention, in 2018, we lost something that was a tremendous asset for New York, which was federal deductibility of state and local taxes, known as SALT deductibility. When we lost that, everybody, all the taxpayers that really support the city, their taxes went up substantially in 2018.
Do you think what's playing out in New York City actually gives some indication of where the Democratic Party may be heading?
It's very fragmented, and so I'm not sure about the role of parties in the future of our democracy. This election was organized and driven in large part by a relatively small group of the Democratic Socialists. It's a group that I kind of trace back their power to Occupy Wall Street of almost 20 years ago. And so I think we may be going through a similar kind of transformation where we're seeing communities step up and say our traditional organizations, political or otherwise, are not doing for us what we need done. We are feeling increasingly left out. Any of the benefits we expect and the opportunities we expect as Americans, we're priced out of the housing market. I mean, in New York, our median rents are about $4,000 a month. Who can afford that? The employers, if you ask them, what's the hardest thing about recruiting new talent to the city? They'll say it's the rents. They can't find an apartment. So these are the issues that have been zeroed in on, particularly by all the candidates. Honestly, these were the issues in our campaign, all the candidates. But the most compelling solutions came from the socialists. And Mamdani claims, my door was knocked on in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is a purple neighborhood at best. Mamdani claims to have 50,000 volunteers. The Democratic Socialists organized this. So we're not talking about a situation where he was delivered this by the Democratic Party. Quite the opposite.
Whatever Mr. Mamdani's primary victory in New York City this week ends up meaning, this is not the first time that a large city has turned to progressive policies. Harvard economist Ed Glazer has made a study of American cities over the years, and he's found structural factors that bring such policies to the fore.
I think about the sort of, the great challenge of cities is that there's a bent-in natural
Her på 65 kan du snu ned igjen. Det akkurat her support.
Number of relatively poor people. And that's not because cities are bad for poor people. It's actually because cities are typically good for poor people, because you have better social services, because you have the ability to get around without a car for every adult. And so you have this built-in kind of progressive thing. And yet, if cities veer too much towards this sort of progressive urge, they risk inducing the firms to leave. They risk inducing the businesses to go somewhere else, to relocate, to suburbanize, to leave to a lower cost country. And of course, they induce the wealthy to want to leave as well. Because the fundamental essence of a city is geographic mobility, is the fact that this is a smaller geographic unit. It's not like the United States, where people are relatively fixed.
Has socialism ever worked? We have a candidate, Mr. Ramdani, who says he's a democratic socialist. Has socialism ever worked in any city?
I kind of think sewer socialism was pretty successful. So the key mayor is Daniel Webster Hone, who was mayor, 24-year mayor of Milwaukee. It's absolutely amazing. He's one of the prime examples of what's called sewer socialism.
Ja, da får du stelle det.
So this is very far away from the sort of
Du synes ikke?
European coffee house kind of socialism, but it's a socialism that's determined to figure
Romeo er live, det er mennesker her nå, liksom.
services for poor people. He was mayor for 24 years.
Jeg tror vi må ordne bad her oppe, for det blir mye gjennomtrekker nå, føler jeg.
In perhaps his most destructive impulses by the city council, and so there were things that he wanted to do in terms of.
Du synes ikke, Romeo? Kan jeg få please jobbe litt i fred? Nei, helvete, ass.
I think this makes a larger point, right? It's not that a mayor needs to put the interests of the rich first, but the mayor has to balance two things. But it requires a level of progressivism that's just vastly more pragmatic and vastly more focused on the nuts and bolts of government than I think most of what we see around us today.
What you identify is exactly what's being discussed in New York City right now. We have Mr. Ramdani, who is putting forward proposals for the less fortunate, things like free transportation and freezing rent and taxing the wealthy much, much more. And on the other side, you say, boy, the wealthy are mobile and they will become mobile if you do that. Does history prove that out? Will you lose the wealthy?
The wealthy certainly are mobile. There's a healthy
Sleep tight.
How elastic the mobile are and how quickly they move out, but certainly people respond to incentives. And it seems to me that this is a maximally risky moment for New York City to be trying an experiment of hyper-taxing the hyper-rich.
From your experience, having studied cities in the United States over years, how much difference can a mayor make in the economic fortunes of a city?
Well, it's very hard.
Det skal bra nok, Fredrik. Det skal bra nok.
And there are some times when a city is thriving so well that even the worst mayor can do little harm. But if a city is on the edge.
Jeg kommer til å sitte og passe på uansett, men det er som sagt, jeg får ikke passe på hvis dere har mye mer penger enn meg, for da har dere helt andre marginer enn meg.
In which failure can be avoided. So I think in this case, it really does matter.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.
Jeg sa det at vi fant ut på fredag at hvis dere har mye mer penger enn meg på konto, så har dere mye dårligere marginer enn meg hvis ikke dere har stilt inn riktig. Så man må være litt forsiktig. Vi fant ut at hvis du har du bare 2000 kroner mer enn meg, så får du 2 minstesatser. Da får du dobbelt så store posisjoner. Nei, 600 er greit. Jeg har marginer nå på 300. Utfordringen med å ha så liten konto det at jeg må sitte lenger I tradesene, ikke sant? Ellers så blir det ikke noe ut av det greiene her. Da må du tåle at det svinger litt. Mens de som har mye mer penger enn meg på konto, de tåler ikke at det skal svinge så mye, ikke sant? Jeg puttet opp I $150 mer på fredag, Simen. Jeg puttet opp på det etter at han trua med Powell, det greiene han gjorde.
Seeing younger people, more colon cancer, more breast cancer, and other cancers in younger individuals, 20, 30, 40-year-olds, that we never used to see.
What do you think could possibly be the cause? I assume pollution or the environment in some ways?
We assume it's either something in the environment, we assume it's diet, it's ultra-processed foods, it's microplastics, it's changes in the microbiome. We really don't know.
Må Nasdaq litt ned der. Det bør egentlig komme ganske mye ned, egentlig.
Bloomberg Brief delivers the market news, data and analysis you need live every weekday only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets. Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for
Men husk det dere ser nå da, de bevegelsene deres, de bevegelsene man ser nå, det har ingenting med markedet å gjøre. De bevegelsene man ser nå, sånn som på Nasdaq og sånn, ikke sant? Og gull, det marketmakere. Ofte så har traderne på B-book, det vil si det at de tjener penger på tapene deres og så videre. Og det vil du se veldig ofte, at du får sånn merkelige bevegelser, at det går veldig opp eller veldig ned. Ikke noe sånn jevnt, det går ikke sånn der. Den tar ut stopplåsen, dunk, så tar den ut shorten, dunk, opp og ned. Pam, 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 pam. Og det marketmakere som drar kursen alle veier. Det må man vite. Så om natta hvis du setter en stopplås, så går du garantert til stopplås. Garantert. Det spesielt på gull, har jeg skjønt. Den så ekstremt volatil på natta. Så man må være veldig forsiktig med det, altså. Man skal jo egentlig ikke sitte ved posisjoner over natta, med mindre man har en plan på hvor det skal nå, ikke sant? Men sånn som nå når Trump holder på sånn at den plutselig skal sparke inn til Powell, og så plutselig så skal han ikke gjøre det, og så det fred, og så det ikke fred. Da får du også sånne rare bevegelser på dagtid I tillegg, ikke sant? Så det veldig sånn, jævla spesielt nå. Jeg har snakket med flere investorer nå som de vil ikke gjøre noen ting. De vil ikke gjøre en dritt. Ingenting. Så det veldig mange nå som ganske skremt. Bare tenk dere deres da, liksom, når gull ramlet nede da med var nede på 45, nei, nesten 45, ikke sant? Tenk dere på alle de som tok tap nå I sted. Og nå har han gått opp med $20 her, liksom. Uten grunn. Derfor så det så jævla viktig med å ha nok marginer så man tåler de fokka bevegelsene her. For det her ikke noe rene bevegelser. Dette kun marketmakere. Kun marketmakere. Gull skal opp på de tallene som kom på fredag. Og så man, men hvorfor faller det nå da? Marketmakere. Skal ha pengene dine.
Sherry, on the topic of trade, President Trump says he doesn't think he'll need to extend that July 9th deadline for trading partners to secure deals with the US to avoid higher tariffs. But those deals
Saudi Arabia.
Delivering the sweeping global trade reforms Trump promised. Bloomberg editor Tony Chisco joins us now for more. And Tony, we've seen indications of this before, right? With the UK and certainly with the understanding about
vi har bra motstand på
very scant details around these agreements.
Vi har bra motstand nå på eners. Det ble kastet helt, ja.
To these deals that meets the eye, or they've been scaled back, if you like, in their ambition. if you think back about to say April 1st, or when Trump's policies first took shape, this the goal clearly seemed to be a very dramatic remaking of the global trading system, basically in America's favor, or so it was built. And now you're seeing that when you slog through these things, it's not that easy, and the deals that come out are also very broad brush or perhaps partial. So you also have Europe. The EU obviously has a huge trading relationship with the U.S. That's fraught in some ways, certainly for Trump. And we saw the French finance minister, I believe, who came out and said, well, I think we're going to hit that July 9th deadline, at least in the sense of avoiding the worst. And part of that deal possibly involves, buying more U.S. LNG. So it's going to be a very dramatic next 10 days, but the outcome, as you say, may be somewhat less, and there may also be sort of holdouts or holdovers that will take longer.
Because we're also getting conflicting messages from the White House, right? Secretary Bessent talking about potentially leaving that 10% tariff in place instead of increasing them for some countries that are, quote, negotiating in good faith. Do we have any idea right now which countries might perhaps be getting closer to the finish line?
Yes, absolutely.
Input sensitivity. Hvor den nå?
We've heard this before, certainly about
Dette lyden ut.
Being in a sort of a pole position or closer than others. There was an Indian trade delegation that was in the U.S. in Washington the last few days, and there was some.
Den inne på stream? Den inne på Discorden? Hæ?
Very fundamental in some cases, including
Det tannhjul det inne på Discorden, ok? Jeg går på tannhjul. Den der. Og så går jeg på... Hvor var det gikk den? Jeg inne på tannhjul, og så går jeg på... Voice and video, eller? Og så går jeg ned på... Push to talk eller voice activity.
Countries, right? Because there are so many different batches of tariffs at this point. The UK did manage to get, I suppose, a trade deal with the US, but they're still seeing those metals tariffs in place.
Yeah, and that's partially a fear also for countries or major countries like India, the so-called sectoral tariffs. How do you have
input sensitivity? Yeah.
And are they up
voice,
for bargaining? I mean,
video.
The threat of imposing them, whether that's actually up for negotiation.
Nei, da må jeg bare få en ny mic da, rett og slett. Eller en ny ledning, for det er ikke ledningen er jævla kort. Ja, men den ledningen er jævla kort. Så kanskje det er noe med dere.
So you're kind of juggling various balls here, and all of these countries have to do that. Some more, some less, and that's Trump really hasn't showed his hand very much over the last, let's say, 48 hours. Certainly over the weekend, where he just sort of said, "Well, I'd actually like to call time now if I could." And at the same time, if we need some more time, well, that's okay too. So there's this.
Nå må vi ordne bad til deg, så du kan drite i fred uten at jeg sitter her og hører på deg drite.
Bare magen, så går du og driter mye.
Ja, det blir veldig ordentlig. Men jeg hører jo at dere går ut i en døra her, det hører jeg. Ja, badet er inntil veggen min, så jeg hører det. Hele poenget var at jeg skulle flytte opp for å få mer ro. Det er bare mer kaos her, liksom. Det er tre mennesker som går ut igjen på badet her oppe. Og badet ligger rett bak skjermene mine. Det var jo gjennomtenkt. Nei, de har egentlig et bad selv, og bare mangler å koble til vann der. Så ordner det sikkert det seg.
certainly the potential for implications around the world?
Well, so there are two channels by which we
Nå er vi på 370 igjen, da. Det er her motstanden er.
So how much trade gets
Må bryte opp her.
shrunk back on, how much contraction we see in trade.
Jeg kødder ikke, jeg er verdens beste stolen, ass. Fy faen, med god stol.
And I think this week, some of the trade data we will get, we are expecting that front loading of strength to still persist for a little bit. The second way by which we think the trade uncertainty would transmit to the rest of the economy is really true.
Lyden er ikke bra, dette. Ja, vi skal fikse lyden i morgen. Jeg må dra på... Må dra fikse den i morgen. Så fikse den i morgen.
Our expectations is that across Asia we would see a bit of a
Det blir litt kjent oppsett her først, for nå er det overalt her.
Probably would set the conditions right for public investments, so for the government to really step in to do a bit of the heavy lifting at a time when the economy seems to be moving along quite tepidly.
It's one of the channels that we talk about is sort of the embedded nature of tariffs, right, and potentially how entrenched those expectations are. Is that a risk when it comes to confidence level?
Nå forsvant, ser du at det forsvant her igjen nå? Nå forsvant grafen min her oppe. Hvor er den blir av nå?
And I think well, there are two risks. One is that because of the volatility in, trade negotiations, the uncertainty that we saw in the last 2 or 3 months, governments and maybe businesses now.
Som dere skjønner, så er ikke jævla flink med PC.
The inclination to look through short-term noise, to really think about what the ultimate level of tariffs might be, and I suspect that that implies that any of the short-term news or volatility that we see.
Ja, det er ålreit å høre når alle går på dass her.
July 9th, that might actually have less of an impact than what we saw at the Liberation Day announcements. So that's one. Second is, I think also investments are going to be weighed down heavily, but also what's happening by some of the second order effects. So, if you have China slowing as a result of the trade war, as a result of the trade tensions with the US, then what's that gonna imply for the rest of Asia? So I think the effects, the ripple-on effects on the rest of the economy seem to be twofold, and I think.
Faen på 22.600 på Nasdaq, ass. Det er liksom, den stopper jo ikke, vet du. Til og med på nedsalg av egne aksjer så går den opp. Det er
ripple effect that you talk about, because already given the temporary truce that we've seen between China and the US, we're supposed to expect June manufacturing PMI from China to turn positive?
No, well, our house view is that we don't think it would turn positive. We think that it would stay kind of in the 49 region. Obviously, it's been at a 49 area for a while now. We're talking about June PMIs for China here. So I think when you talk about the speed of transmission, we think that it will likely be quite immediate, as we've seen over the last 2 or 3 months. But going back up, so recovering from that's going to be quite sticky, because I think of the tremendous amount of uncertainty around that, the fact that some of these trade deals don't really seem to be the conventional trade deals that people understand them to be. So there is a little bit of a disappointment around the details of that, and I think that will weigh on sentiment for much longer.
The China PMIs are always
a key focus. Manufacturing and business activity, right? Because we have seen, for example, South Korea's industrial production coming in contraction territory, and we were expecting actually a boost.
Exactly. So I think going forward, the risk is that data would surprise us to the downside rather than the upside. Just because I think the strength that we saw over the last few months could plausibly be temporary in nature, front-loading, rerouting trade. A lot of these, I suppose for a lot of the Asian exporters, including Korea, the resilience in tech exports is also one of the factors that we think will potentially normalize in the second half of this year. So a lot of the strength that we saw, a lot of the optimism, a lot of the upside surprises to data in the last 1 month or two has been kind of the temporary factors. So there is no reason to think that, we're not kind of on the way down from here on.
And is that the case when it comes to China as well? Does the sort of temporary truce add any upside potential for the PMIs, given that they're leading indicators anyway, and given there are structural issues that we know of with the Chinese economy, even without looking at the tariff situation?
Yeah, well, for China, I think the PMIs are notoriously noisy. So we don't really want to be too hung up on one data point. Having said that, the situation with China is a little bit different. I think for China, we are not really seeing substantial upside. But on the other hand, because of the truth, because of the fact that we think Beijing officials will continue to leverage on its, critical minerals dominance, that would remove a tail risk scenario. So, I think at this stage, if we talk about macro growth, any growth below 4.5% is probably quite impossible for China. So I think growth will probably be relatively stable and decent this year, but nowhere near spectacular, I think.
Louis Zhu, always good to have you with us, lead economist at Oxford Economics. And coming up on the Asia Trade, UBS joins us with their market outlook. Plus, we talked to Japan's biggest pharmaceuticals wholesaler, Betty Paul, about their business strategy. Much more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Denne uka så er Nasdaq opp 6,1% på en uke. På et år så pleier Nasdaq å gå 9%. Mellom 9 og 12%. Jeg sier det igjen. På en uke nå så er Nasdaq opp 6%. På et år vanligvis er vi opp mellom 9 til 12%. Så vi har gått opp basically 9 måneder på en uke. Bare for å sette ting i perspektiv. Nå forsvant grafen min igjen. Hva er det som skjer her egentlig? Hvorfor forsvinner alt?
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be
Hva mener du jeg skal ta opp grafen hele tiden?
Like Bloomberg. Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Interesting question. Good question. Great question. I so appreciate that question. You certainly ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions. Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets? We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Jobs Day, and Bloomberg has the report under surveillance.
There is this feeling that labor market is contracting.
There's some risk that layoffs are growing.
Medium-term outlook is the economy should be fine.
This Thursday, Jonathan, Lisa, Anne-Marie, and Mike will bring you crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed.
The weakening trend continues.
This is a trend. We're seeing declines.
If you're not with a job right now, it's harder to find a new one.
The June Jobs Report, Thursday on Bloomberg.
President Trump's signature tax and spending bill is facing opposition from some Republican senators as another deadline looms. Trump wants the legislation passed by July 4th, and party leaders need to find a way to appease most of around 8 senators who've expressed concerns. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Alicia Diaz. Alicia, so
gullfisk. Ja, men jeg får ikke vist den, vet du. På kamera sitter der, så jeg får ikke vist noen ting her. Jeg tror jeg må ha kamera bak. Jeg tror kanskje det bedre, ass. Jeg får ikke vist noen ting.
They came to this agreement that they would increase the limit to $40,000 over 5 years.
Dere får ikke sett noen ting av det jeg sitter og ser på. Det er ganske sinnssykt. Vi må få vist alt bedre i morgen.
This is very important for their constituents.
Nå forsvant grafen igjen. Jeg skjønner ikke hva som skjer her.
At the same time, there's a group of senators who are conflicted about the bill. Some say that it's too expensive and want to look for more spending.
Det som feil her, for grafen min blir borte hele tiden.
That they're doing to Medicaid to some of the federal government's run healthcare for the poor and the disabled could hurt their home state significantly. And so, of course, we're reaching that July 4th deadline very soon. And so there's going to be a continuation of negotiations and trying to get some more Republicans on board over the next few days.
The president hasn't necessarily delved into the details of the deal, right? But might that be necessary in terms of amendments and the details that opponents are not happy with?
I think that will come to light over the next couple of days.
Ja, jeg kan gjøre det.
Senate
Veldig bra,
is
kan du sjekke.
recently revising their version of the bill to bring some of these other Republicans, some of the more moderates, some of
Det
the
ganske sjukt oppsett av
more
oss.
concerned about
Sjekke.
the deficit impact on board. So as they reach these negotiations, we will kind of get that final baseline of what the bill really entails, and some more of the details will continue to come out through the next week.
Yeah, you can actually see live pictures with Senator Chuck Schumer on that screen talking about $4.45 trillion deficit explosion is what he's calling it. But tell us a little bit, Alicia, of how this is playing in with the broader American public, because, of course, you mentioned some of those tax cuts would come from spending cuts in other areas like Medicaid and things that are important for the more vulnerable parts of American society.
Det som skjer?
I think it remains to be seen how the bill is going to play with some of the Republican communities across the country. Early stages, it hasn't pulled entirely too well. Of course, Republicans are really relying on this bill. They have the so-called trifecta, the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. So this is their chance to really get a big piece of legislation through the door. And it'll impact them through midterms and future election cycles if the public doesn't vote, too well with the results of this bill. So I'm sure we'll see more of how that sentiment plays out in coming months.
Bloomberg's Alicia Diaz there. Some of the other stories that we're following this hour.
Det er jævla fett. Det blir ikke noe fetere enn her, ass. Og forhåpentligvis null forstyrrelser. Nå ramler jeg ut. Jeg er så balleræva, ass.
President Trump says he's found a buyer for the U.S. operations of social media platform TikTok, but won't provide details for 2 weeks. Trump told Fox News that it was a group of very wealthy people, but the deal will need China's approval, and he expects President Xi Jinping to agree to it. Trump has said he will extend a deadline for ByteDance to sell its U.S. TikTok operations for a third time. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong will meet with her Quad counterparts during her visit to Washington this week. Wong will meet with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, along with representatives from India and Japan. According to an emailed statement, this will be the second such meeting of foreign ministers from the 4 nations within 6 months. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the administration's goal is to secure a peace deal with Iran following the strikes on the country's nuclear sites. Speaking to Bloomberg, he added that Washington aims to promote commerce, not conflict, in the Middle East.
The sanctions are still in place. No change there. I think what President Trump was referring to there is, hey, if we make a large peace and sanctions come off, Iran can flourish.
Have you got a decent understanding, though, Mr. Secretary, of just how much Iranian crude is being consumed and imported already as things stand, despite the sanctions?
We do. So Iran produces about 3.5 million barrels a day, and they've been exporting about 1.5 million barrels of oil a day. And the maximum pressure campaign that President Trump did in his last term tamped that down to only 100 or 200,000 barrels a day. They cut off 90% of it. That was a possible strategy here as well, but hadn't been implemented yet. We tried to give negotiations a chance, see if we can do it without maximum pressure.
So is maximum pressure still on the table, or is the administration walking away from that?
Well, the goal right now, of course, is to get a peace deal, is to get peace into the Middle East and spread the focus on commerce, not conflict. So no, it's not actively being discussed right now, but the situation's still dynamic there. We want to see peace, prosperity, and security as the future of the Middle East.
When it comes to what's going on in Iran as well, in terms of the IAEA, the foreign minister said yesterday that basically they have no plans to having the Director General, Rafael Grossi, in Iran. And it doesn't sound like they're willing to give the inspectors the space, time, and access they need to look at these nuclear facilities.
Jeg tror den på full skal den være...
Response to that.
Yeah, look, this is early on. Iran has just had most of its nuclear program entirely devastated by Israel and the United States. They're a little bit humbled. They're a little bit shell-shocked right now. So, yeah, I wouldn't put too much weight on those words, but a final peace deal certainly has to have confidence in a dismantlement of the Iranian nuclear program and that people can have security it won't be resurrected in the future.
You deal with a lot of nuclear at the Energy Department. Before the U.S. strikes, but after the Israeli strikes, Rafael Grossi told us that the IAEA cannot verify where the 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium in Isfahan was currently where it was. Was it still there? Did the Iranians take it out? Doesn't the IAEA need to go in and verify where this enriched uranium is?
That's quite likely part of a future negotiation or a future deal.
U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright speaking to Bloomberg's Jonathan Ferro and Anne-Marie Hordern. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Det noen som har sånn Squawk-side som de har, som de er fornøyd med? Squawk-side sånn med news, live news hele veien. Financial Juice har jeg tenkt at jeg kanskje skal abonnere på. Jeg vet ikke om dere har kjent noen annen side. Som kommer ut med sånne headings hele tiden. Hvit. Ja, jeg har fått hvitrådstol. Heter det vel. Høvdingstol. Det er faen beste stolen jeg sitter i hele mitt liv.
Sort of the largest infrastructure build in human history.
To meet the people rewriting the rules of code and culture.
How do you personally grapple with the pace of it all?
It does feel like it's going very fast.
When did you realize, oh my gosh, my life is never going to be the same?
The day I got engaged, I was like, whoa.
Ja, men har ikke Stig tatt og programmert den selv da? Eller er det abonnent fra et sted? Er det sånn API-løsning, eller har han progget han selv? Den henter news fra alle sånne Twitter-accounts og sånn. Hvis du ser på den Financial Juice.
Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Onen.
Det ser jævla bra ut, liksom. Da har du alt av news hele tiden hvor de prater. Bam, 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 bam.
This is the Asia trade. The latest from the corporate front. Ford CEO Jim Farley says the automaker had to idle its factories in the U.S. for the past 3 weeks due to a shortage of high-powered magnets.
Har du testet Financial Juice?
For domestic supply chain as U.S.-China tensions restrict supply of rare earth elements.
Ja, gjerne det, intro, for noen ganger så blir man sittende på etterskudd når det kommer sånn breaking news som Trump og sånn. Det er greit å liksom være på ballen. Makroen har kontroll på, men når det kommer sånne news som hitter, vanligvis så har jeg sånn squawk som jeg har gjennom noe som heter Infront. Men det er jo et helt annet system. Aksjebøss høres jo dritbra ut da.
take a look at how we're shaping up when it comes to US futures right now. We're seeing quite a bit of sort of muted optimism, if you will, about the 0.75 or about 0.4% higher when it comes to US futures at the moment, despite these concerns that the trade deals might fall short of expectations.
Men kan vi koble dem opp så de kommer opp I chatten sånn automatisk, så alle får med seg? Det hadde vært litt kult da, hvis det hadde gått an.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg.
Making money isn't about drowning in emotions. It's about understanding what's actually happening. Markets are the best way to glean signal from noise, and that is what we try to do every morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning.
Hva det popper litt sånn pop? Hva det for noe?
I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Jeg så jævlig usikker på om jeg skal sette en short her. Men det bare for å kjøre en hedge. Jeg har ikke lyst til å gå short.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
Han er akkurat på breakout nå. Enten så bryter han rett opp her, så flyr han forbi 75, eller så kommer han ned.
Sort of the muted developments in the Middle East, right? Winding back really that risk premium before now an OPEC Plus meeting is that next point of focus. We're seeing Brent really pulling back 0.8% softer there. We're also seeing some downside when it comes to havens, like gold off by 0.2%. But when it comes to oil, we saw that biggest weekly loss in more than 2 years. Hedge funds, bearish bets following that fragile truce being struck between Iran and Israel. We're set to see OPEC Plus considering another 411,000 barrel a day increase for August. They meet on Sunday. That would be the 4th month of a bumper hike. So crude at the moment pretty close to where it started before the first attack by Israel on Iran on June 13th. So we're looking back to the fundamentals of supply and demand. We're also watching iron ore ahead of those China PMI gauges later today. Well, the trade war, all of this has had an impact when it comes to Australia's forecast for commodity export earnings as prices dip, demand softens amid rising trade tensions. Bloomberg's Paul Allen joins us now with more. The uncertainty when it comes to China's trade, China's domestic growth situation, how's it playing out?
Nå er dritbra da.
You know, the drivers of
du fornøyd med den, Pro?
Typically stuff that we dig out of the ground.
Yeah, not terribly encouraging. The Department of Industry, Science and Resources puts out a quarterly report, the latest one, even more bleak than the one that preceded it. Total resource and energy export down 7% in the year to June. That's dollar terms about $18 billion, so that brings it down to an estimated $252 billion US. And then if you break it down by particular commodities, iron ore, which is Australia's largest export commodity, most of it goes to China, the biggest customer. Well, it was already suffering from weak demand due to China's property difficulties, and the tariff battle with the United States hasn't really helped either. The body of the report deals with that specifically, saying, look, businesses and consumers are just adopting a wait-and-see approach when it comes to not just iron ore, but a lot of other commodities as well. And the outlook's not great either. That's expected to keep going, that trend, over the next couple of years. Demand keeps slipping, although faster than in the previous report 3 months ago. LNG, Australia's second biggest export. There's new supply coming on from the US and Qatar, so that's going to see another $21 billion decline over the next 2 years.
A whole different picture when it comes to the price of gold that's been steadily rising, right? Is that going to soften the blow when it comes to Australia's commodities exports?
Yeah, to some degree, 3,200 an ounce. I mean, we're off record highs, but still not far from them. And if you put that into Aussie dollars, the gold price is still above 5,000 an ounce. So if these prices hold, gold is going to soon overtake metallurgical coal as Australia's third biggest export earner, and that's behind.
Nå sier de at hvis det fortsetter nå, så kommer gullprisen til å stige, og det kommer til å være den største eksporten I Australia I forhold til kull. At gull kommer til å ta over eksporten på kull I Australia. Se for seg $5,000. Gold. Det hva man kaller skikkelig makro. Så de sier da at det fortsetter å gjøre nå, så kommer de til å eksportere mer gull enn kull. Volummessig aner jeg ikke. Det I hvert fall ikke negativt.
Take a look at watching when it comes to the start of trading this week, with markets coming online in about 25 minutes or so here in Australia, as well as watching Japanese stocks as well. We've already seen US futures kind of ticking along to the upside. We're seeing a little bit of muted upside for Aussie futures there, and Nikkei futures us trading at 0.9%. US stocks on Friday.
Så kommer nok et tall på gullutsikter.
The resilience of the US economy despite these ongoing trade talks, which is a bit of a mix in sentiment given the concerns that it may sort of fall short of some of the details that markets might want. And institutional investors we've spoken to appear cautious about stocks in the second half.
Han vil liksom ikke slite med å gå forbi 70.
Let's get more from Garfield Reynolds, who leads our Markets Live Asia coverage. The reality is that there's plenty of uncertainties, right? Whether you're looking at sort of bread and butter fundamentals as we get back to earnings, you know, the macroeconomic risk, trade, geopolitics, the markets seem to be kind of muddling along and quite happy to see the upside.
Yeah, well, there are certainly some corners of the market that are very much doing that, and I think you can't underestimate the impact that retail investors are still having. You also, I was thinking when you were giving that rundown of risks and thinking, well, you know, the market's kind of lived through the ultimate play out of risks when it comes to tariffs with the reciprocal tariffs, April 2 Liberation Day and all the shock that caused. And the stock market has more than come back from that particular decline that followed after that. So in that scenario, there's an unwillingness to bet against US equities. Given that they have come roaring back time and time again. You know, we had similar meltdowns back in early 2023 with the regional banking crisis. We had the concerns in late 2023 when the UK problems.
Short eller long, just to live.
We've had other
shorter ikke enda,
similar angst levels, and yet here we are again looking at equities at a record.
Det klart at når det faller så får man litt vondt I magen og skal shorte, men da har man på en måte bomma på traden da. Hvis du skulle gå short på gull, så skulle du gjort det for 2 uker siden, liksom, når det begynte å falle. Så ikke gå short etter at det har falt $150, liksom, og tro at du skal gjøre en jævla bra trade. Da risikerer du å få den midt I trynet. Den har bare gått ned på grunn av uttalelser fra Trump, den har ikke gått ned på noe fundamentalt. Alt fundamentalt verre enn noensinne. Den falt for han skulle sparken til Powell, og så falt det på grunn av freden med Iran. Powell får man ikke sparken til, freden med Iran sikkert ikke over, og inflasjonen stiger. Så 3 ting da, som tyder på at den skal opp. Men det vanskelig å time liksom, om du skal kjøpe den her, om du skal kjøpe den og falle $10 ned, om du skal kjøpe den, altså det litt vanskelig å si da. Og nå sier akkurat Australia at de tror at de kommer til å øke eksport av gull, og det ser ut som det kommer til å bli mer eksport av gull enn kull, som første gang noensinne for Australia. Så da kan, og så sier de at de tror at gullprisen skal til $5,000, sa den nettopp. Og nå ligger vi på $3,268. De spår gull I $5,000. Du kan tenke deg nå, hvis Nvidia begynner å falle nå, for nå har innsider begynt å selge masse Nvidia. Hvis Nvidia faller, så drar den med seg Broadcom, den drar med seg Meta, den drar med seg Alphabet, den drar med seg alle de AI-aksjene, hvis den begynner å falle, og da kjøper du gull. Det er det eneste du kan kjøpe for å stå imot. Du kjøper ikke olje, du kjøper gull, du kjøper sølv, du kjøper platina, men basically gull da. Det er det du kjøper. Og bonds og gull, altså kjøper firm assets da, ikke sant? Så sånne steinrike mennesker nå, de sitter nå og plukker gull. Plukker gull og plukker gull, for de vet at det skal opp, og så bare venter de og bare, oi, nå går det, så tar de gevinst. Sitter og plukker og plukker og plukker. Hva er forskjell på å få en feil tredd i trynet eller stjerten? Jeg tror det er like jævlig egentlig, ass. En sur trade er sur trade. Men det er som den memen jeg sendte i dag, alt dreier seg om hva Trump twittrer. Det dreier seg ikke om andre ting nå. Det er sånn helt tullete. Hva sier Trump i morgen? Nei, det vet ingen, og da går det den veien han sier det skal gå.
Much yippiness when you take a look at the longer end of JGBs?
Yeah, there's definitely some yippiness there. I mean, we'll see. It's been a bit of a whack-a-mole for the BOJ and for the Ministry of Finance. They managed to scrape through with the 20-year sale. Last week went off much more easily than the prior month's sale, so we'll see how the 10 and the 30-year go this week. There is a lot of concern. It probably helps the JGB outlook that for the moment the US Treasuries market looks like it's in a decent place. So if that continues to be the place, if we don't see any too much upward pressure coming across from the US market, then they might scrape through, but there'll be a fair bit of nerves for both of those auctions. That's tomorrow and then later on in the week.
Garfield Reynolds, always good to have you with us. He leads our Markets Live Asia coverage. And of course, a reminder that we have live coverage of the ECB forum in Portugal on Tuesday. We'll hear from key monetary policymakers, including Fed Chair Jay Powell and the Bank of Japan's Kazuo Ueda. It will be moderated by Bloomberg TV's Francine Lacroix at 9:30 p.m. Hong Kong time. And coming up next, we speak with Japan's largest pharmaceutical wholesaler, Medipal, about their business outlook as Tokyo's top trade negotiators continue high-stakes talks in Washington. This is Bloomberg. Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Sherrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the centre of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering. We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
At a time when policy in Washington is driving Wall Street, we draw a distinction between the rhetoric and the action, bringing you market-moving guests and original reporting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute financial news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee at the Federal Reserve, and this is Bloomberg.
Take a look at how we're setting up for the Japanese market opens. We have seen 4 sessions of gains for the Nikkei. We're seeing some upside early in the session. And of course, we'll be watching the Japanese yen as well because it's become weaker against the US dollar. We're seeing a little bit of more of that rebound, but we're still in the 144 level against the greenback. You can see the Singapore Nikkei futures pointing to the upside right now, 0.8%. But what we'll be watching is a JGB space because we do have a 10 and 30-year auction on tap. Of course, we have seen a lot of volatility in this space. We do also have, in a few minutes, Japan industrial production numbers, so do stay with us. But let's talk a little bit about one company, because Japan's biggest wholesaler of pharmaceuticals saying that it plans to evaluate cash deployment strategies to ensure better returns to shareholders. Medipal issued the rare statement last month saying it wants to increase return on equity to 9% by the 2027 fiscal year and improve its price-to-book value ratio. Let's get more on all of this with Toshihide Yoda, Senior Managing Director at Medipal. Toshihide, really good to have you here in the Tokyo studio. Before I get into the details of your financials, just tell us a little bit about your company, because you were 3 pharmaceutical wholesalers that merged back in 2000. So what do you specialize on? Because you're sort of a distributor for major companies within Japan.
Thank you for your question. We are, of course, a pharmaceutical wholesaler, but we are trading actually everything in Japan. However, the primary market, like hypertension drug, such a kind of drug will going to the generic. So maybe the Japanese market bipolarized to the generic and specialty pharma. We have to make a strategy for bipolarized, right?
So in your financials, your price-to-book ratio has been below that 1 time for the past 5 years or so. Your target right now is raising that. Do you have a time frame in mind?
Actually, we have the midterm plan year ending March 2027. And our target is by the end of the midterm plan, we are trying to reach to the PBR 1 times.
What prompted this sort of focus on your price-to-book ratio right now?
Firstly, we have to make a new business or profitable business. In addition to that, we have to reduce the net asset. We are selling, investment shares. Historically, we have plenty of investment shares, and it's cross-holding. We are selling, and afterward, we make a share buyback and cancel our stock. So both sides, the increase the profit and reduce the asset, then we are trying to reach PBR 1 times.
How confident are you when it comes to the profit goals, or do you think there might be some flexibility in needing to revise those?
We think about at least the 1 times. Because historically, pharmaceutical wholesaler and including maybe similar company, we are thinking about a P&L statement only one. But balance sheet is quite important, and because of both strategy, P&L statement and balance sheet control, we believe reach our target to the PBR 1 times.
What are the plans when it comes to the use of cash in hand right now?
Actually, as I said, use the cash to share buyback, and also the important thing is diversify the profit resources, which means maybe the MA strategy is quite important.
Etter at om kvelden her, for jeg skal opp tidlig og sitte her og ordne med grafene og sånn i morgen tidlig. Jeg følger med. Dere som har sånn minikonto som meg, dere kan jo putte på litt med penger da, for å ha marginene og heller ta det ut igjen. Eneste jeg kommer til å gjøre eventuelt er å sette en short mot longen, eller så gjør jeg ingenting.
pharmaceutical wholesaling business, maybe margin will be squeezed in the future. Still, is squeezing right now.
Wow.